What's up, everyone? Welcome to a show on Stephen King. By the way, if you guys have a comment for me on Stephen King or any other topic, whether you're joining for the live stream or not, let me know your question down in the comments below. I will reply to every question. Just finished up a novel. It was called From the Corner of His Eye by Dean Koontz. And I feel like I want to get into another Stephen King. I've completed 53 Stephen King books at this point, and I'm working toward reading them all. And it's time for me to take on another one. I actually think that I might read this one next. Billy Summers is the name of King's new one. You know, King actually has another book projected to come out in 2022. I was looking up if he has anything coming out. And the third piece in the Gwendy's trilogy is coming out, of which I've read the first, Gwendy's Magic Feather, co-authored with Richard Chizmar, who I had on the program here. I don't know, about a year ago I talked to him. He's going to come back on and talk with me about that Gwendy's Final Task is the name of the last book, which will be published in February 2022 by Stephen King and Richard Chizmar. I need to read the second book, which is called Gwendy's Magic Feather, which interestingly enough is authored in Castle Rock without Stephen King. You see, for this trilogy that Chizmar writes with Stephen King, they co-author the first book. Chizmar writes the second book, and it's King and Chizmar again for the third book. So I really need to get all of those completed. I'm looking forward to that. And hopefully King has another book or two, if we're lucky, that will come out in 2022. I was really surprised by the length of this Billy Summers novel. I know that King, as he's gotten older now, he's quite old now. He's 75 or so. He was born in 47, I believe. He's written some shorter pieces of late. So I was really happy to see that Billy Summers is a full-length novel. It's nearly 500 pages. So I hope that King continues to produce full-length works for years to come. You know, I actually think, and I'm going to get to the comments here in a moment, guys, whether you're joining me live or afterward, if you have a question on Stephen King, ask it in the comments, and I will reply to all of the questions. So what I was saying with Stephen King, actually, I forget what I was saying. So let me, I bought 11/22/63. You know, that's one of my, well, it's one of people's favorite books. Let me grab my copy. Where is my copy? There it is. 11/22/63 by Stephen King. This is a book that I read over a period of 3 long days. I read this book in 3 days. That's all I did for 3 days, was read 11/22/63 by Stephen King. You know, King, if you're a constant reader of his works, you'll notice that King mentions John F. Kennedy a lot throughout his works. References will come up in different novels and short stories. King, I think, was deeply impacted by the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And so he decided to write a whole book about it. And it's a time travel story. It's a historical science fiction type book. And people just love 11/22/63. There are connections in that book to it, to Pennywise, and the characters in it. So keep your eye out for that. If you haven't read 11/22/63, keep your eyes peeled for different connections to other books. Favorite characters in The Stand. Thoughts on Nadine. You know, I finished The Stand. I actually tried to read The Stand probably about 10 years ago. Couldn't get through it. Could not finish that book. However, I started it anew this year and I completed it. And I actually quite enjoyed it this time. It really is an epic, in a kind of Lord of the Rings type fashion, a long journey. But Nadine was an interesting character. She was the right-hand man of Randall Flagg. It was a really good book. However, I'm actually making a video here that's going to be coming out both probably within the next week. It'll be my top 10 Stephen King antagonists that I've read about and protagonists. And I think that Harold Lauder might be on my top 10 list of Antagonist. He's a really interesting character, very bizarre guy, very strange. I don't want to say pathetic, but strange man is Harold Lauder. And it was interesting to see how his psychology changes in The Stand. So I really liked him as well. I liked Tom Cullen as well in that one. What's the scariest Stephen King book, in your opinion? I'm not really sure what I would say with that. I think that the novel strangely enough, It is a novel that I tried to read years ago. I couldn't get through it. I was just suffering with it. And then I restarted it last year and I quite enjoyed it. So it's interesting what a change of perspective and time will do for you. If you ever have a novel that you give up on, maybe later on it will be worth reading. Of course, I had to read it because I'm reading every one of Stephen King's books, but the scariest book might be It. I'm not really sure. I don't like the term scary for novels because it's hard for a novel to really scare me unless it's really about the human condition and the malevolence that humans seem to possess. But I like Duma Key as well. I thought that it was a really interesting antagonist in that one. Try out Duma Key if you haven't read it. Yeah, I hope that King does write for a long time to come. I'm looking forward to Billy Summers. I've got to read Gwendy's Magic Feather so that I can read Gwendy's Final Task when it's published in 2022. I was thinking when King passes away, and hopefully it doesn't happen for a long time, but you see with authors like Arthur Conan Doyle, for example, after he passed away, people started writing in his literary realm. So many Sherlock Holmes spinoffs have been written. And I expect that that will probably happen with Stephen King. Say King passes away at some point in the future. It's almost certain to happen that other authors in tribute to him will write in Castle Rock and they'll write in Derry, Maine. And maybe they'll have stories that take place in the Dark Tower multiverse. I think that that's going to be interesting in the future with Stephen King. He's one of the most successful writers to ever write, not just financially speaking, but I would say he's probably had the biggest pop culture influence of any author probably in the history of writing. J.R.R. Tolkien is up there, but he only had he had a multitude of stories in the Middle Earth, but King has just done so much. The Harry Potter series is probably a more successful story than any single story that Stephen King has ever authored. Harry Potter is probably the most successful story, and in fact, certainly it is. In the history of novel writing, Harry Potter is probably the most successful. However, Stephen King's had a bigger pop culture influence overall, I think, because so many movies and huge bestsellers. But yeah, hopefully King writes until the day he dies. He probably will. And I hope he probably will. And I hope that when he does pass away, that other authors will author in his Castle Rock and Derry and Ludlow and all of those other places. And I'm sure they will. Chismar authors in Castle Rock without King. Peter Straub writes in Stephen King's multiverse with King, by the way, but still, it'll be interesting to see. For those of us that outlive King, it'll be interesting to see how many people write in his world. Joe Hill, it wouldn't surprise me if Joe Hill writes. Joe Hill actually writes in Stephen King's multiverse. Pay attention when you read Joe Hill, because I recognized it in Horns, and I found it in Nosferatu, and I found it in The Fireman, where Hill in his novels will have his plot going, seemingly unrelated to Stephen King's world, but there'll be a location given. Like it'll say, we're this far away from Castle Rock, or we're this far away from Derry, Maine, which puts Joe Hill's works inside the Stephen King multiverse, which I thought was quite interesting. So keep your eye open if you ever read any Joe Hill. What's your funniest moment with Eddie Dean in the series? Mine is when he hits his head on the top frame of the door in Song of Susanna. I've actually got a video coming here soon where I talk about books that I want to reread in the near future. I've got 10 books that I want to reread. We're going to talk about them, but I've only reread a novel 3 times in my life. I read Dean Koontz's Fear Nothing twice, and I've read the first 2 installments in the Tower series 4 times each. I've read those novels. The rest of the Tower novels I've only read once. So it can be kind of hard for me to remember what happens in those later Tower novels because it's been years now since I read them, anywhere from like 5 to 10 years now since I've read them. Been a long time since I read The Wastelands and Wizard and Glass, but I really liked in The Drawing of the Three actually the funniest moment, I'm not sure. I know there's some funny moments with Eddie with Blaine the monorail, where Blaine is trying to riddle Eddie. And I won't stay here on the Dark Tower books, but that might be the first thing that comes to my mind when Eddie is trying to match wits with Blaine the monorail. And it's like Eddie's almost stupidity is what causes him to get one over on Blaine the monorail. But I won't talk about that anymore for people that haven't read it. But that's the only thing that comes to mind for that question. Nadine is a good character in The Stand. I really like The Stand. I thought about doing a guided tour of that. Any of you guys that have seen my first 2 guided tour for the Dark Tower novels would know what I'm talking about, but that would be way too much work. That would be probably a whole year's worth of work to do that one video, so I chose not to do it. Richie and Beverly appear and meet Jake Epping for a moment at 11/22/63, which I think happens at the beginning of that novel, but there is at least one more connection that I know of, and I don't want to mention it here for any of you that are reading 11/22/63. Just pay attention when you read that novel. You won't possibly be able to miss what happens. Ed Deepenow from Insomnia was also unhinged. I still get chills when I hear a small plane. Ed Deepenow is a character from Stephen King's Insomnia, one of my least favorite King novels, which is all about the Dark Tower. I actually did a video on how Insomnia connects to the Dark Tower series, and I talked to Bev Vincent, who will be on the show again soon, about Insomnia. I'm actually going to have Bev on the show to talk about, we're going to do a video called Stephen King Connections, where we just talk about how Stephen King's books are related. I think there's potential for a video on that subject to do well, especially with Bev Vincent, because he's one of the world's leading experts on the Stephen King multiverse. I'm kind of hesitant to do it, though, because I really want to read Bev's book. Bev wrote a book years ago called The Stephen King Companion, where he talks about just a bunch of stuff. And there's still some classic King that I haven't read. I've wondered, why haven't I finished the Stephen King catalog yet? And I think that for the longest time, unconsciously, I was choosing not to read them because I don't want to finish all the Stephen King books. Then what would I have to read? All I would have to look forward to at that point would be if King published a new novel. So I think I've been putting them off. However, it is time for me to finish those up. I still need to read Cujo. I still need to read Gerald's Game, which I gave up on not that long ago, but I will reread it and finish it this time. I still haven't read the 4 Bachman books that are in the Bachman book collection. I still haven't read The Running Man, which will probably be the book that I read after Billy Summers. I feel inadequate as someone who's becoming an expert on Stephen King that I haven't read those damned 4 Bachman books, and I gave up on Rage earlier this year. I thought that's really not the best novel. I love to own a copy of the paperback, but I will get through all those. I'll restart them all and read them. And like what happened with The Stand and It, books that I struggled with, I let some time go by and tried them again, and I actually enjoyed them. So I think The Running Man will be the very next Bachman book that I read. I've only completed 2 Bachman books. The Regulators, The Dark Half was the other one. The Lord of the Rings, I actually really liked. And a book that I'm going to be reading soon here. I like The Lord of the Rings. Damn, did I love that book. I read it earlier this year. Actually, at the tail end of last year, I read the first installment, The Fellowship of the Ring. Earlier this year, I read book 2 or part 2 and 3 of The Lord of the Rings, which was originally one novel. But I don't want to get caught up in The Lord of the Rings here as we're stuck on Stephen King. But The Hobbit by Tolkien, I'm planning on reading it, and I will read it, maybe before the end of the year. I also have this book. It's called The Lord of the Rings and Philosophy. It's a series of essays that different authors and philosophers have compiled for a book on what the Lord of the Rings means. And I want to become... I'm not as big on the Lord of the Rings as I am the Dark Tower and Stephen King in general, but I want to know more about the Middle-earth saga. You know, there's a book called Stephen King and Philosophy that I want to read, and I will. However, I've put it off because there's going to be a lot of spoilers in that for some of those classics that I still haven't read. So I need to get those classics read. I expect that this upcoming year, 2022, I will probably finish all of those Stephen King classics that I haven't read yet. I really got to get those done. I've got to get those done. Favorite King novel? Not as popular as it. The stand for me, it's Needful Things. I read Needful Things for the first time a couple of years ago. I liked that one, and I really liked the prequel for Needful Things, which is called The Sundog in the Four Past Midnight collection with Pop Merrill in Castle Rock. You know, Pop Merrill has a little store where some supernatural type shit's going on, which is a really good prelude for Needful Things. Salem's Lot in The Shining. Yeah, his stuff will become public domain, but it would be a long time before that happens. You know, it would be interesting if King collaborated with Dean Koontz as well. The horror, I can only imagine how many copies it would sell if King and Koontz co-authored a novel. 11/22/63, you know, it's been about 7 or 8 years since I read that over a 3-day period. And I remember not being exactly thrilled with the ending. I vaguely remember what happened, and I won't get into it here, but 11/22/63 is a great novel. It is a great novel. A lot of work went into that with Stephen King. 11/22/63 is a great book. I highly recommend it. Where Eddie blows himself up with illogical. Yep, that is true about Blaine. Yeah, no, Pennywise is not at the Kennedy assassination, but just keep your eye out when you read 11/22/63. I'm sure there's connections in there. I know things like gunslingers are mentioned and stuff like that, but some people have even went as far to say that 11/22/63 is like a companion piece with the novel It, which is not true. But there are some mentions of the novel within 11/22/63. Crazy how It and Shawshank Redemption are in the same setting. I can't remember how that plays out, but I do remember Shawshank Redemption. I don't think the actual location for Shawshank Redemption is revealed in the novella, because I just read it earlier this year. A few months ago, I finished Different Seasons for the first time. I really loved the breathing method in that one. It just surprised me. I thought that would be my least enjoyed in the collection because it's at the end of the book. It's the shortest piece. It's a true short story, is the breathing method, but I know that he dedicates that one to Peter Straub, and the reason is probably because it has a similar feel to Ghost Story by Peter Straub, which is a novel I gave up on years ago that I'd like to try again. But in Shawshank, I don't believe that the actual town that they're in that prison is revealed in that novella. Explain Desperation to me. Listened to it on audiobook and didn't like it. On my reread list. Desperation by Stephen King was the very first Stephen King book that I ever read when I was a teenager. And it's about an evil entity named Tack, this agent that is invisible in it. It's in the city of Desperation, Nevada, and it starts inhabiting the bodies of people. And it's like a disease. When Tack takes you over, it kills you, and it goes from host to host, and it kills everyone in the entire city of Desperation, Nevada, which is no spoiler because that happens before the novel actually starts. When the novel starts, Tack is actually inhabiting the very last person in Desperation, the sheriff, Colleen Trajan, and he's sending Collie outside the city limits to bring people in because it doesn't have anyone left to kill. And it brings people in and puts them in the jail in Desperation. And that's the plot setting. The people have to figure out how they're going to survive Colleen Trajan. That's on my reread list, which is going to make my video that'll be coming out in the next several days. Top 10 books I want to reread. There are 2 Stephen Kings on that list, Desperation being one of them. Been over 20 years now since I read that. It takes a while. He has 3 that are over 1,000 pages. Stephen King's The Stand, you know, it's hard to get an actual page count on that book. You'll see different estimates for it. Some say it's like 515,000 words, which if that's true, it's the longest novel I've ever read. But It is over 1,000 pages as well. 444,000 words are in the novel It. It's 444,414 words. Technically, quartets exist in other books too. The Losers Club and It can be considered one. And another one is The Stand By Me Kids. Or The Body, actually. I tried to get the Bachman books on eBay, but I got outbid. I have a collection. I have actually a few different paperbacks of the Bachman books, my bigger black collection. This is my Bachman books. This is worth about $50. And then I have two of these, the paperback version. These are probably worth $20 or $30. This one's beat up pretty good. I started Rage earlier this year. I just wasn't into it. Maybe it was just a bad time for it, but I've got to read these Bachman book stories. However, the next book I'm going to read by King will be Billy Summers. Then I'll be going to The Running Man, which is that in the Bachman book collection? Actually, I think it is in the Bachman book collection. Yes, it is in the Bachman book collection. So I will finally be reading one of the installments that's included in the Bachman books collection. Early this year, I'm going to go on a tear with Stephen King's. Let me pull up my Goodreads real fast, because I didn't read all that many Stephen King's this year. The first book that I finished this year, and I'm pulling Goodreads up now, was Joyland by Stephen King. That was my first book. I actually started it at the tail end of last year in December, and I finished it earlier this year. Here's my year in books. It by Stephen King. That's not right. That was last year. Where's my this year in books? I'll have to pull it up on my phone. But I read like 7 or maybe 8 Stephen King's this year. I'll pull it up real quick on my phone here. I didn't do that good reading this year. I planned to read 60 books this year. I just finished my 22nd one today, which was a nonfiction book called The Power of Now. But I finished a book yesterday by Dean Koontz. But at the beginning of the year, my first book I completed this year was Joyland by Stephen King. Third book that I read this year was my 4th go-through of The Gunslinger. The next one I read was called Charlie the Choo-Choo by Stephen King. So that was 3 King books I read this year. Then I read Different Seasons, which was the 4th one. Then I read The Stand, which was 5 King books. I read Pet Sematary this year, and The Drawing of the Three, which is 7. So I read 7 Stephen King books this year, 2 of which were a reread for the 4th time. So Blaze, I read Blaze. It's Stephen King's take on Of Mice and Men. I read Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, The Stand, and I've been working on it for a while. If you ever want a list of Stephen King books, if you go to the Stephen King website, there's actually a lot of good material there. And there are lists of all his works. You know, King has published in so many different books. I thought I knew how many different books Stephen King has published in. There are so many of them out there. I'd really like to start buying leather-bound copies of my favorite books. There's one on the Sherlock Holmes pieces that I want. I want the leather-bound copy of A Lord of the Rings. There's this guy online. You can catch him on eBay, might even be on Amazon. He makes these leather-bound copies of books, and there's a leather-bound The Dark Tower set with, it's like the titles are burned into the rawhide. It's just absolutely phenomenal. I think it's like $500, or it might even be more, but I'd love to have that set. King's inspirations are vast when considering his epic series. By the way, guys, whether you're joining me now or you stop in after I stop the live stream, if you have any question for me, ask it in the comments below and I'll go through and answer them all. King's inspirations are vast when considering his epic series. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, The Lord of the Rings, Lovecraft, and medieval mythology. You know, I still haven't read Lovecraft. I have a paperback here of his work somewhere. But I still have to read my first Lovecraft story. The black guy from The Shining is mentioned in it. I'm doing a video soon on my top 10 Stephen King protagonists, and Dick Halloran will be mentioned probably in that video. He's on the list now. I still have to revise it, but Dick Halloran shows up in several different Stephen King stories. I really liked catching Dick Halloran when I read it. I don't believe that Shawshank is in Castle Rock. Let me look it up here. Where is the Shawshank prison in the novel, in the book? Maine. Shawshank State Prison is a fictional New England state prison that is alleged to be in the state of Maine. It serves as the primary location in the novella Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, but it's not in Castle Rock. It's just outside of Castle Rock. I think that's the only location clue that we get in that novel, is that it's described as being not far from Castle Rock. Mr. Halloran is from the Overlook Hotel. He's also in the novel It, and he might even be in some other ones. There's this thing called Wiki Fandom, where people put articles in on their favorite characters and stuff. Let me look it up. Dick Halloran, Wiki Fandom. Dick Halloran, Wiki Fandom. Let me see if he's in any other books. It'll show you what appearances they made and stuff. Whoops. Appearances. The Shining and its film adaptations. The 1997 film adaptation. The 2016 operatic adaptation. He also appeared in It and in Dr. Sleep. That's the other one that Dick Halloran shows up in. So he's in The Shining, Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining. So that's fitting for that. And he's also in the novel It. So he shows up in 3 different books. Should I read the Stand of the Dark Tower series first? You know, I did a video here on the channel about a year ago. I did a live stream where I talked about the reading order for those books and the books that you could include in with them. I would say if you're really interested in reading The Stand, go ahead and read it. But if you're only wanting to read that as a supplement to the Tower series, I would say skip it. Too much to go through just to read as a supplement. It's not all that important to the Tower story anyway. Well, yeah, I better not say anything. My number 1 King protagonist, I'm not really sure. I would have to think about that, and I am thinking about it for my top 10 Stephen King protagonists video that I've got going on. Roland, the anti-hero, comes to mind. The Stand is longer by word count than It, but it's a longer page count. Depends on which copies you get. But The Stand is the longer novel. I'm reminded of the opening scene of the movie version of The Stand. All those dead people reminded me of the horrifying scene in the early movie, The Andromeda Strain, when there's a town of corpses. You know, I've read 3 Michael Crichton books. I want to read Jurassic Park. I've read Sphere, Timeline, which is a great time travel novel. If you like 11/22/63 by Stephen King, check out Michael Crichton's Timeline. And I read one by him called Next, which I couldn't hardly stand. A quartet is a fellowship. In the Dark Tower series, Roland assembles his fellowship. He gets his Sam Gamgee. He gets his Pippin and Mary, and those are referred to as his quartet or his destiny partners. Rage is pretty controversial. You know, I should have invested in the novel Rage. About 4 years ago, I was thinking about buying a copy. They were $600 at the time. I said, that's too much. I'm not paying it. I should have bought as many copies of those as I could possibly get my hands on because they're going for $2,000 now. Doesn't matter how beat up it is. A copy of Rage by Stephen King is a cool $2,000 right now, and it continues to go up. Salem's Lot. I read that one 7-8 years ago. I thought it was an okay novel. I wasn't as big a fan on it as many people seem to be. Yeah, and I think it was because I'm really a big fan of this series, which I'm going to be reading the next installment of here pretty soon. The Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. This is the mark of vampire fiction for me. And I didn't like Salem's Lot as much as I liked Interview with the Vampire or any of the other books in it, but it was still a pretty good novel. About to read The Stand for the first time. I have considered writing myself, but it would be too much work. Too much work for something I'm not passionate about. I had a couple ideas for a couple stories, but We don't even know if it's Maine, but in Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption, someone says something to the effect that the prison is not far from Castle Rock, which leads us to believe that it's probably within Maine. There was a Shining Opera, 2016. I just got a Losers Club shirt not long ago. I also got one for the Overlook Hotel. I'm going to start buying more Stephen King shirts. You'll see them here as I continue to do King content. You know, I've thought about like strictly making this a Stephen King channel, because when it comes to growth on YouTube, if I do something on Stephen King, it usually does pretty well. Some of my other stuff, not as well. So I don't know. I need to start doing more Stephen King videos. I'm looking forward to reading 2 more Stephen King novels so that I can do a ranking 55 Stephen King books, because I know that that'll do well. One of those is going to be Billy Summers, the next Stephen King novel I'm going to read. Then I'm going to read The Running Man, and then I'll do a ranking, because I'll have finished 55 King novels at that point. I also have to read this, The Institute. Bought it online, got a used copy for $4. Looks like it has a little bit of a coffee stain on it. You probably can't see that. I'm getting a new camera soon, by the way. We'll be shooting in 4K, so you probably will be able to see something like that in the near future. But I've been spending all my extra money on wrestling mats. I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm putting a gym in my home. And wrestling mats cost a lot, so I haven't got the camera yet, but I will soon. But I've got to read The Institute by Stephen King. Also, another Bachman book that I've got to read, Thinner. And I gave up on Gerald's Game earlier this year, you know, and the problem was that I picked this up when I really didn't feel like reading it. I just wanted to finish another Stephen King book when I should have waited to be in the mood for a Stephen King. So I gave up on Gerald's Game. I gave up on it real early in it, though. So I think that Gerald's Game will probably be completed in 2022. I will start it over and finish it. You know, 2 more books I've got here. King co-authors with Richard Chizmar. King seems to really like Richard Chizmar. You know, Chizmar wrote this novel. It's a new one, Chasing the Boogeyman, that I want to read soon. I actually borrowed it from the library recently. King gives a lot of signed books and memorabilia to the Cemetery Dance, which is a literary publication of Richard Chizmar. They make some beautiful books there at Cemetery Dance. I have my Cemetery Dance copy of Blockade Billy by Stephen King, which is really nice little hardback. But I know Cemetery Dance, they'll do these limited edition. They did a beautiful copy of The Stand, which now goes for like $800. They did a really nice copy of It, which I seen online the other day for like $700. I wish I could get one of those Cemetery Dance special editions. King did an interview recently, about a month or 2 ago, and the interviewer asks him, "What's your favorite book of all time?" And he thinks for a moment and he says, this book right here, Lonesome Dove by Larry Mcmurtry. I was saying his name wrong for the longest time. I was saying Mcmurtry, but it's actually Mcmurtry. But I want to read Lonesome Dove. It's almost in for me on Libby. If it was in right now, I'd probably start it right now. I'm in the mood for like a 1,000-page epic journey and drama. But this is Stephen King's favorite book that he's ever read. Why do people not like the last books in the Dark Tower series? You know, Stephen King was hit by a minivan in 1999. It nearly killed him. It messed his ass up. And people have said that they detected a difference in his writing. And Bev Vincent talked a lot about this with the last interview I did with him. However, it seems like the first installment in the Dark Tower series, The Gunslinger, is in a particular style. The 2nd through 5th installments are a different type of style. And then the 6th and 7th installment are yet a different type of style. And people just don't really like the stylistic changes, I think, therein. However, I liked all the books in the Tower series. Timeline and Sphere. You know, Sphere I was not as big a fan of as Timeline. I thought that was just a great book. I like time travel books. I haven't seen the Jurassic Park movie since I was a kid. Maybe Salem's Lot could be considered a small town story rather than a vampire story. I just love those vampires in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. The next one I'm going to be going into will be this: The Tale of the Body Thief. I've been putting it off. I already bought it on Audible, so I don't know what the hell I'm waiting for here, but I need to get into this. You know, there's a bookstore nearby. It's been over a year since I've been to it. I think I might grab my camera and go out there and do a video of me browsing around. It's a locally owned used bookstore. I just want everybody to see the inside of this place. It's just stacks and stacks of books. Only problem is their prices aren't the best, but I'm going to go back out there soon. Are there any direct references to the tower in Lisi's story? I don't think that there are. Your top 3 videos aren't Stephen King related. Yeah, one of those is a Goodreads tutorial that I did. One of them is a Dean Koontz coronavirus prediction thing. Skeleton Crew is a book that I read a couple of years ago, but I've got to get Thinner completed. I really got to get those Bachman books completed. It's kind of unusual, I think, that as someone who's read as many Stephen King books as I have and who's as knowledgeable about everything as I am, I've got to read those Bachman books. I've only read The Regulators and I think The Dark Half. Let me look that up. I'm having trouble remembering if The Dark Half. List of the Bachman books. The Regulators. Blaze was the other one that I read that was a Bachman book. Blaze. It wasn't The Dark Half. I am not familiar with the Paperbacks from Hell. I may have mentioned it before, but Stephen King said Anne Rivers' Sid 1974 novel, The House Next Door, is one of the most frightening books he ever read. It's a brilliant horror novel from an author not known for that genre. I've never heard of it. Yeah, King does put some very interesting things in those last 2 books. You know, I really like Ted Brodigan's story in Hearts in Atlantis. It's my favorite Stephen King book, Hearts in Atlantis is, which is a collection of stories. But I didn't think that the last 2 installments of the Dark Tower series were filled with vanity. I just thought they were really interesting how King brings a special character in to his last 2 installments of the Dark Tower series that I thought was quite fitting. Dance Macabre. I haven't read it, but I do own a copy. I forgot I've also read On Writing. On Writing is another one that I haven't. I don't think I've read any Stephen King nonfiction. I'm going to have to do that. Here's a Stephen King nonfiction. Faithful. 2 diehard Boston Red Sox fans chronicle the historic 2004 season. They actually made a mistake because diehard there in the cover is not a word. It's not a word. It's a phrase. But anyway, this is about the 2007 baseball season. Stephen King's a big Boston Red Sox fan, and I am not looking forward to reading this book. I'll do it, but I'm not going to be doing it soon. Yeah, in the novel It by Stephen King, and I'm going to wrap this up here soon, guys. It's time for me to eat and start a new novel. I don't know what I'm going to start here because I finished From the Corner of His Eye, which was a massive novel by Dean Koontz. 729-pager I finished last night. It took me 12 days to read it, along with the nonfiction I was reading. From the Corner of His Eye. This is going to be a troubling book to review, but I might start Blood Rights by Jim Butcher, which will be the 6th installment in the Dresden Files series. And I might not. I might do the vampire story. I'm not sure what I want to read yet. I thought about reading a Stephen King, but I'm not in the mood for it right now. I'm not in the mood for it because there's one Stephen King book that I want to read next, and that's going to be Billy Summers. I'm going to read it. I'm going to review it here on the channel. And I do not have the audiobook copy of this right now. I'm in line for it at the library. I'm out of Audible credit. So Billy Summers will be the next one that I do. Yeah, when it comes to that scene in it, I thought it was a very bizarre type thing. I've had people explain it to me, and it seems to be the fact that King is trying to entail there that the children have now transcended out of childhood because of everything that they've been through and are now adults. And that's the scene that makes that apparent, that they're no longer children. But I don't know. I thought it was a mess. The House Next Door, on the same level as the Haunting of Hill House. I've wanted to read that, The Haunting of Hill House. If I had it right now and the audiobook version, I would probably might start that tonight if I had it. You know, I'm someone who I read a book and I play the audiobook and I just follow along as the audiobook goes. I just follow along. That's how I like to do it. So I've got to have both the audiobook and the paper copy. I'm thinking about buying a Kindle Paperwhite. You know, Audible now, or Amazon now, allows you to pay installments for stuff. I was surprised by that. I can get the newest Paperwhite for, I think it's 5 installments of $28 monthly, which I thought was interesting. One of the problems, plus, if you buy the Audible ebook of a book, you get a significant discount on the Audible audiobook version of that. So there's a lot of perks with having a Paperwhite. But I wanted this book called Choke. It's actually pronounced Shock. That's about the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil. It's a history book. But for whatever reason, the paperback was $41, which is a little steep, I actually had the library buy it for me, and they bought it. It's on its way in as a library material, and they'll let me know when it's in. I love my local library because every time I want them to buy a book, every single time I've ever put a purchase request in, they buy it within like a day. But that same $41 paperback is $9.99 on the Kindle. So plus I like the fact that, like, let's say that I just want to read a book. I don't have a hard copy of it or anything. I can have it right now without having to put any order in and wait for it to be shipped. I could just buy the ebook and then buy the companion piece on Audible and play it and follow along. Like right now, if I chose I wanted to read, let's say I didn't have this copy of Billy Summers, I could say, you know what, I'm starting Billy Summers the night after dinner. I could buy the ebook, buy the Billy Summers audiobook version on Audible, and be immediately right to it. So that's a perk of having a Paperwhite. As someone that almost has to have the audiobook copy along with it, I don't like now reading a book without that audiobook. I just find it hard to do. It's not the same experience for me, you know. Neuroscientists have looked at the difference between what happens in someone's brain when they read text and when they listen to that text. And there's a lot of similarities going on in the brain. Some people respond better to either one of the formats. However, for me, I've found that of the two, the better experience is just reading the text. I get a better experience reading the book than listening to the audiobook. However, if I can do both simultaneously, it's a better experience than reading the text alone. It's just more vivid. It's almost like it's more of a clearer movie playing out in my mind if I have all those brain mechanics going on at the same time. So I just like to read and listen simultaneously. I got hooked on that when I did the Clan of the Cave Bear. Yeah, King's been writing since the 70s. Now, you know, Dean Koontz has been writing even longer. Koontz has actually even published more books, although Koontz has had a pretty successful career. He's worth like 50 or 60 million. There have been several or more movies made off of his books, but he hasn't had nearly the pop culture impact that King has had. A lot of people never even heard of him, but almost everyone in the first world has heard of Stephen King and knows of at least one thing that he did. I might go read more of it once this gets done. I have a couple different. Whoops. I like these. I'd like to get the paperbacks of these, this style of Stephen King cover. This is what I read when I read it about a year ago. I read this paperback and I listened to the Audible narration of it. But I also have this, the paperback that a viewer sent me. Really nice paperback in good condition. My copy of The Stand, and I don't even know where I got this. It's on the beat up side. It's a little torn. I could put tape on it, but it's not even worth it. Actually, it looks like I got it probably at a library sale. I can tell that it used to be a library book. They have this copy of The Stand. Let me see if I can actually get a picture of it. And I'm going to rewrap it up here shortly, guys. The Stand, new book. I'll show you what I want here. There it is. I want to get every Stephen King book in hardback. Of course, that's not always possible because you can't get Rage in a hardback. Also, for the hard case crime books that King did, Later and The Colorado Kid in Joyland, if you want a hardback of one of those, it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you. The one for Later is going for like around $800 now. It was a limited edition type thing. Let me see if I can show you this picture here. Of course, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I could have swore I could have shown a picture of this damn thing. But anyway, there's this nice version of, I don't know what I'm doing, but there's this nice version of The Stand. It's like a yellow cover. You look it up on Amazon. It's just nice version of The Stand. Mine's all beat up. I want to get that nice version. There's no jacket on it. It's just a hardback with the ink on the actual book. It's nice. I want to get some leather bound Stephen King books as well. I'm going to start a leather bound collection. I think I might start picking up about one book per month. I want the Lord of the Rings one. I want the Sherlock Holmes ones and some Stephen King ones. Eddie and Callahan's banter about baseball will always be iconic. I don't actually remember that happening. It must happen in Wolves of the Kala. How do you get the library to buy something? My local public library, you can put in a purchase request. You see, we have this Search Ohio system where if my public library doesn't have something, they'll send you another library for it. However, if the other libraries don't have it listed, you can put in a purchase request and they'll just buy it. They'll buy it. And that jiu-jitsu book is a rare book. None of the libraries have it. So they bought a bunch of stuff for me. Kuntz is my favorite author. I can pick up any of his books and find it enjoyable. Kuntz is probably the wisest novelist I've ever read. In fact, I know he is. That guy has so much in his books about reflections on life and the human condition. They're a joy to read just for that. Just finished Joyland literally 3 minutes ago, and to my surprise, a Stephen King live show as I logged into YouTube. Joyland by Stephen King. You know, I'm learning Spanish now, and I'm going to do a video about that on the channel here. One of my goals is to read a Stephen King novel in Spanish, and I want to do a video about that. But I have Joyland, which I read, first book I finished this year. Have Colorado Kid that I haven't finished. I'd like to have all these in hardback, but I'm going to get a Spanish copy of Later, and it's probably going to be a couple of years yet before I can actually read that. Or a year to 2 years probably, but I want to read Later by Stephen King in Spanish. It's not a long book, so I think that as my first adult novel, I want to read Later in Spanish. Yeah, Midworld would be an interesting place to work, to live. I love this book. It's called The Complete Concordance, revised and updated for Stephen King's The Dark Tower. I'm reading every entry in this as I'm making my way back to the tower. And once I get there, I'm actually marking off every entry that I read in this. It has all the characters, all the places, all the religious stuff, the games, the rituals, and it also has Robin's kind of philosophical elaborations on what she thinks about the series. So get you a copy of this if you're a Dark Tower fan. You don't know what you're missing. I wouldn't recommend getting it while you're reading the series for the first time, though, because it's just filled with spoilers. And it even tells, like, Mother Abigail is in this. I think she's the first character listed as Mother Abigail in the A's. Mother Abigail, actually, from The Stand, if you don't know, Mother Abigail has an important role in the Dark Tower series as well. No, actually, the first character is Aaron Jaffords, but the second one is Abigail, Mother. In the alternative version of Kansas, which our Tet traveled through, I don't want to spoil the novel, but this is a literal concordance, and that's the entry for Mother Abigail. So I read about 40 King books and 20 Kuntz books. I've read 14 Dean Kuntz books. I finished my 14th yesterday. I've read 53 Stephen Kingers. The hardcover later are expensive. I'll look it up right now. Hardcover for sale. Stephen King's later. They were auctioning some on eBay because they're limited. I think it might have been like 500 of those they did. Let me see if they even have any more. There's the hardcover. Damn! They went for $50, but they're going for a whole hell of a lot more than that now. Because on eBay, they're worth a lot. I'm looking it up on eBay. Stephen King's later hardback. Might not even be possible. That book, The Stand, that I want, $35.55 on eBay. They don't even have. There's actually a signed copy of Carrie, first edition by Stephen King, for $600 on eBay right now, which I would like to have. I don't have anything special from Stephen King's collection. I don't have any like limited first edition that's worth hundreds of dollars or anything. Of course, I have all these hardbacks. These up here on these top two shelves are my Stephen Kings, but I don't have anything that's like highly valuable from King. I have my Bachman books collection that's worth like about $50. Hearts in Atlantis is my favorite because there's a Dark Tower side story in there that is just really good. It's really good. It's about the tower, and I think just the quality of the writing. I was more absorbed and just fully consumed by Hearts in Atlantis than any other King book that I've ever read. It was a great book. Harry Potter on the weekends. I've read 3 of those. I need to read the 4th one. I keep putting it off. Maybe I should start that tonight. Yeah, I like The Lord of the Rings. I'll be reading The Hobbit soon. I read The Lord of the Rings for the first time at the age of 36. My 37th birthday was about a week ago. But I'm catching on late to the Lord of the Rings thing, but I really loved that book. It was not slow and dull and dated like a lot of people said it was. I thought it was just a fantastic book. It's probably second to Harry Potter for the biggest success in the history of a published novel. The Lord of the Rings is probably number 2, second only to Harry Potter, because that Harry Potter blew up like nothing that ever blew up. Mother Abigail is probably the only ultra-religious person in King's work who is a good guy. Well, the Manny folk are relatively good people, although I'm not sure how directly we get to know any of the Manny folk. That's in the Tower series. First edition, first printing of The Shining, but it's an old beat-up library copy and not signed or anything. I have a fairly old copy of The Shining, but it's not a first edition. I got this old green jobber here. 3 Potter books. I like those Potter books. I've got to read that 4th one. for the last probably 3 years, I've read about one Potter book a year. And I remember him. That's such a great story. Man, is that a good story. No wonder it did as well as it did. And it still does well. I need to read that fourth one. This is the Potter book that I'll be going into. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I don't know. I'm not as committed to this series as some other ones. So I don't know when I'm going to read this damn thing. This is where the first big ass Harry Potter book. The first 3 were relatively small, short novels. And the third one, Prisoner of Azkaban, is a time travel novel. Well, folks, it's time for me to get something to eat and decide which one of these books I am going to read tonight. It's time for me to start another novel. So thanks for joining me, everyone. If anyone has any question for me, let me know in the comments and I will go through and answer all of them. And I will see you guys later.